most disrespected person in America is the black woman. The most unprotected person in America is the black woman. The most neglected person in America is the black woman.
What up, what up? Y'all have made it back to another episode of the N-Word Podcast. If you don't know, the N-Word Podcast is powered by the South. The South is where black culture defines political power. Totally forgot to say unapologetically black culture defines political power. But it's cool. We're just going to keep rolling. I am one of two of the hosts. Kevin, my other host.
What up, y'all? Angela P.
Yeah. Let's jump right into it. But before we jump right into it, Angela, I believe you have something.
I wanted to give a sort of content warning, maybe a trigger warning for some, but this episode we're going to talk some about sexual assault, sexual violence, and things that are very traumatic for folks. A lot of folks experience these issues, you know, in our community, self included, in different parts of my life, and can understand that sometimes hearing conversations about these topics can trigger folks into not great places. So want to just say at the top that if that is something that you're experiencing and that might be an issue for you, sending you lots of love and care, and just encourage you to take care as you're listening to this episode, or if you decide not to listen to this episode. It's all good. It's all love. But we did want to offer that warning as a heads up at the top.
And speaking of triggering, let's get into accountability. When you experience accountability, what would you say is the hardest part about that experience for yourself when you're experiencing accountability?
That's a great question. I don't know if this is the hardest part, but one of the things that kind of just first came to mind for me is I think there are moments where, at least there are certain experiences I have where it's like I'm being held accountable for a harm that I did that I didn't know was harm or was not intentional. I was not trying to be harmful or commit harm. I didn't know that what I did would be experienced as something that was hurtful or harmful for somebody. And so it's definitely one of the hard parts is being like, oh, well, that's not what that was. That's not what I was trying to say, or that's not what that's not a thing that's hurtful, right? I didn't know. Because the thing is, it's like, it's about the person or the community that is experiencing harm and then wanting to hold me accountable for my actions, right? And so to me, it's the hard part is moving through the feeling of like, well, that wasn't what that was. You misunderstood what I was trying to do, or you didn't understand how you were hurt by that, but it wasn't hurtful because you shouldn't have been hurt by that because of X, Y, and Z things. And honestly, like, that's not really what it's about at the end of the day. Like, it doesn't mean that my truth isn't a truth that can exist in the context of lots of other truths, but it does mean that if there was harm and I'm being held accountable, like, I have to make space for that, the other person's or the other community or the other side of the story, in order to be like, okay, so I can receive and be a part of the accountability process.
That's interesting. Would you say that your answer is also essentially saying that, like, you prioritize the articulation of this person, you know, naming the harm or the accountability almost in like a higher priority than what comes up for you immediately or whenever it comes up, which is oh, well, that's not what I was trying to do, but
I think I prioritize the reality that somebody was hurt or that there was an experience of harm. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not necessarily that the other person's truth matters more than my truth, but what does matter more than like me being right or me proving that whatever I said or I did wasn't actually harmful, that matters a lot less than, or the reality that somebody felt hurt. And this is also in the context, usually and ideally, of someone or something or an entity or community that I'm in relationship with. And because I'm in relationship with them, I care about continuing to be in a relationship and being able to, like, that relationship being healthy, and therefore kind of like, what matters more is not what I need, that my truth, that it wasn't being hurtful or harmful, needs to be at the top. What actually matters is, oh, you were hurt. Okay. Yeah.
Word, that makes sense. So it's interesting because I know you said your answer was no, but your answer still reminded me of something that I do when I'm experiencing accountability. And, to answer the question about like, what's the most challenging part about experiencing accountability from my experience, I think that the hardest part is recognizing that, or experiencing for me, that like a lot of feelings and energy comes up, but the feelings and energy comes up almost in like, it's almost like I experience it as like loud sounds. And because I've grown and have developed my relationship with accountability for such a long time, in a very intentional way, for me, in my experience, in my process, once I get that like almost like alarm loud noise feeling, I almost immediately, I have to prioritize what I think is the healthiest sound, which is someone else is articulating and naming that, I need to be held accountable, that there's harm done, that there's anything, like something I did something, and now I need to receive what that is. I need to hear this person articulate what that is. And I've recognized for myself that the best way for me to do that is to also recognize that, like, oh, you're feeling and hearing and reacting to a lot internally. Like I'm feeling and going through a lot internally.
I see.
And I'm like, okay, there's about 7 different sounds being played right now, but like 1 or 2 of them are most important, and those 1 or 2 sounds are all in relationship with this person trying to articulate accountability to me, and I need to hear that out.
So it's like you're saying, like, the hard part for you is that in the moment, it's like it feels like a lot of loud noises, a lot of sounds, a lot of different, whether it's your emotions, the other person's emotions, energy, whatever. And you have to sift through all of that in order to hear the important part.
Yes. And that's not the hard part. The hard part is going from, let's just say, like, silence to those 7 sounds being. Mm-hmm. That's the hardest part, because my reaction is like, oh shit, what the fuck? Oh god damn.
Mm-hmm.
What the fuck? What's happening? Mm-hmm. And then because I often know what my sounds are like, mm-hmm. I'm like, hey, that shit is happening again. So let's make sure your sounds aren't playing too loudly in relationship to all of the other sounds that are playing.
It makes me think like, it also sounds like anxiety. Like that moment, that loudness is like, it's a anxious reaction, which totally makes sense. And I think about how, a lot of our challenges with accountability are due to, I think, how we teach lessons to children.
Yes, absolutely.
When they're younger, or when we're all growing up, because we use punishment as a way to help people understand what's right and what's wrong, help children understand what's right and what's wrong. And then we sort of internalize that accountability equals punishment. And that is not at all necessarily the case. And it shouldn't be. It doesn't have to be the case. And so like, I feel like people, a lot like, especially I think men, and I wasn't raised, as a boy to be a man. So I don't know this experience necessarily, but I do feel like there is just this, like this allergy or this like rejection to like accountability. Like, totally. No, don't, it's not that, like, don't, especially, thinking about the situation with Diddy and all of the allegations that are coming out now against him. And when that video, before the video of him assaulting Cassie came out, there was all this stuff about the lawsuit, and people were like, some sides of the internet were basically having a reaction that was like, don't hold him accountable, or he doesn't need to be held accountable for this. And I think that, and for me, I'm watching it and I'm like, huh? Like in the comment sections, like, what?
Yeah.
And it's because people are like, so weary, leery, afraid, like I said, allergic to being held accountable, because we feel like at our very root experience, being held accountable looks like being punished, and punishment looks like getting beat, right? If in many households, it looks like not having access to food, not having access to, things like, it's just this way of like punishment. Accountability equals punishment, I think, sets us all up to have a really toxic relationship with it, when actually accountability can be a gift.
Going back to what you said earlier and what I confirmed, which is like this anxiety experience that comes up as a part of, I know, my experience with accountability, or not necessarily like all of my experiences with accountability, but like when accountability is challenging for me, that usually anxiety has some pieces of it. And I know, that's connected to also what you said, which is like, oftentimes our experiences of accountability is punishment. Oftentimes, and that punishment, actually, we all experience punishment differently. So, growing up in my Haitian household, punishment was definitely a real thing, and that definitely impacted my ability to process accountability. That definitely impacted, it's an immediate impact. And I also say that as somebody who recognizes that though I had a on a scale of like 1 to 10, like a level like 6, sometimes 7, like level of like punishment style, if you will, from the Haitian household, I know that like I've some of my cousins, I've experienced them niggas like have like some crazy ass punishment, and I'm just like, damn, I've never actually. Thank God I don't have to do that shit. Thank God I'm not, literally, just thank God that I've never experienced that. But like, I think that is a real connection to, why it is so challenging for people to experience accountability. I think that's a direct connection. I feel like actually accountability isn't something that, is intentionally taught in homes.
No, not at all.
In schools even. So what basically fills that void, in my opinion, is essentially a bunch of trash, essentially a bunch of toxicity that often teaches you and tells you to fight like hell, run away, do all you can do to avoid accountability. And not to mention the American legal system often represents punishment.
That's all we got is punishment.
Like literally, like how many, people people get incarcerated for drug offenses. People get incarcerated because they had a mental episode that caused them to do XYZ, and they're not treated with help. They're treated with punishment. And now it's like this reinforcement of, yep, that's what accountability looks like. So to me, it's like, our culture is embedded, is aggressively rooted. White supremacy is aggressively embedded, aggressively rooted in like accountability looks like violence. Accountability looks like straight up abuse and punishment.
Well, and actually, it's not even accountability. It's just punishment.
Right.
It's just violence, right? Because you're not actually being held accountable. I mean, if this country was held accountable for the deeds of its freaking founding, well, that looks like reparations.
Right.
That looks like a whole, and that for this white supremacist system, that's why we can't actually have accountability in our quote legal system, in our economics, in our relationship with the economy as the consumers and producers and so on and so forth. Because if we actually make real accountability, not punishment and violence, but accountability and judgment, if we make accountability the center of of our society, or as a more foundational part of it, then America has to be held accountable too. Mm-hmm. There has to be a reckoning for how we all got here, how all of these banks have their money, all of these institutions, all of these entities that have been around since the 18 blah blah blahs. Well, if you were around the 18 blah blah blahs and you're still thriving, chances are you're sitting on some slave money.
Right.
Chances are you're sitting on some genocide funds. But an accountability situation to that looks like actually redistributing wealth and power, and that is something that the white supremacist system cannot tolerate. So it actually needs to feed this idea, not in addition to using punishment in order to put people into prisons, right? It needs to feed this idea that accountability is punishment in order to avoid actually being accountable, taking responsibility and receiving accountability for the foundation, the harms that brought us to this, that started this country.
Right. And even thinking about that, it makes me think about like power's relationship to accountability. Mm-hmm. And like, especially thinking about this Diddy and Cassie violence, it makes me think about how like, well, one, if I have a bad relationship with accountability, I certainly don't really have the tools to be able to know how to hold myself accountable. Mm-hmm. If I can't hold myself accountable, then I certainly can't hold people in my community accountable. If I can't hold people in my community accountable, I can't hold powerful people in my community, powerful people outside of my community accountable, let alone, what does that even look like to hold power accountable if I don't have no relationship with, accountability. And it makes me think, because, So I read the Diddy Cassie or Cassie's lawsuit on Diddy. I want to say it's like 38 pages or 48 pages. And like, you know, the majority of my experience in reading it and going through it, I just kept thinking like, damn, nobody could stop. Like nobody felt empowered enough to stop this man. Nobody felt strong enough. Nobody had a relationship with accountability that was so healthy for themselves that they could look and see the bullshit that Diddy's going through and causing on other people, innocent people, and be like, hey, yo, nah, we got to hold this motherfucker accountable. Because it's just like countless moment after moment after moment after moment of Diddy leaning on his power to do some aggressively violent, aggressively whack ass shit, and nobody hold him accountable. Like literally, it was like almost in reading the lawsuit, it literally reads like this boogeyman that can't be stopped. And I don't say boogeyman to downplay the
I know what you mean.
seriousness of the whole entire situation.
But he's like this dark, like
Voldemort type shit.
Yes,
like,
exactly.
Don't even say this motherfucker's name.
Right. Let alone hold him accountable for everything that we're watching happening right now.
Let alone hold him accountable.
It's so interesting.
And to me, if we're like really like, what is the psychology of that shit? What is the science behavior behind that shit? To me, it holds a lot of pieces of what we're talking about, which is that like people grow up and don't teach their kids like an intentional, you know, people don't intentionally raise their kids or teach accountability.
They teach punishment. Like I mean, how many times have we heard stories of like kindergartners being suspended? How you suspend a kindergartner?
Ridiculous.
They're 5.
Like what are we talking about?
They're gonna sit like it's just or like, you know, like it's just such a twisted thing. Like how do you know? How do you know as a baby? Like how do you know what's wrong and what's right and what you need to be held quote unquote accountable for until you mess up, right? But when you mess up as a kid and then you get punished, it's just like it just makes it, and punished violently, it just makes it very clear that like being responsible for something that you did wrong, even if it was a mistake or whatever, looks like violence.
Right. And like you could like from reading any media outlet that covered the Cassie Diddy situation, like go on their Instagram and like read the comments and you literally just
everybody's trauma is just spilling out.
Everybody's trauma is screaming out loud, and it literally feels like people are just running away from like the violence that is actually their trauma showing up because their trauma taught them that accountability looks like violence. So it's like, oh my gosh, can we stop this? Like literally, can we stop this dragging of this black man? Can we stop this lynching of this black man? Oh, like we've been talking about it for so long now. Can we move on? It's very much like a, please, let's stop fighting. Please, like, stop hitting me, beating me up. It's like, yo, this man has gone through a decade, like, of straight up abuse. Even more than that.
Yeah, much longer.
Like, much longer. Bad Boy has been around for a very long time.
Yeah. Over 30 years, I think.
But, like, speaking specifically about the Cassie piece.
Yeah.
He's literally abused, dominated, caused so much harm and violence towards Cassie, literally created a system of violence, harm, and like low-key like a systematized kidnapping that I can imagine like Cassie woke up one day and was like, oh shit.
Am I kidnapped?
I actually have no freedom. I have no, and like in reading it, that's also something that came up for me too, is like, damn, you know, I feel like my masculinity, my toxic masculinity was like, what the fuck? She couldn't just get up and leave, or damn, like she couldn't just say no or like push him off. And it's like, actually, no, she couldn't.
Yeah.
There are levels to this shit. It's so much depth that's like one, you have this young ass girl at the time. Young ass girl. I can't remember how old she was when she met him.
I think she was 21 or 22, maybe.
It was something of that range, mad young. And like, just thinking about myself as a 20-year-old, 22-year-old, 24-year-old, you know, even though in that time I was like challenging myself to combat what white supremacy and anti-blackness taught me, I still feel like there was a huge part of me that still had the like reactionary little boy part of me, like literally just and like, to me, I can only imagine what a young girl is experiencing as her boss, her employer, is literally causing all this violence towards her, and she's like, wait, what the fuck? Like, I can imagine that this young woman like had no idea, one, what accountability looks like. How the hell do I hold my boss accountable?
And
Literally that alone. How do I hold my boss accountable?
But just the power dynamics is also,
And that dynamic alone. How do I hold my boss accountable? To me, like, thinking back in some of my work experiences where I had to hold my boss accountable, I literally had to go into exercises. Like, I had to like, all right, today I'm going to hold such and such accountable. I'm going to tell them what they did was fucked up. I didn't like that shit. And this is what I want. And this is what needs to happen. Or else it's about to be some crazier shit that's going to happen in this motherfucker. I would literally like have to hype myself up in the morning, like on the train ride, on the way to the office, listen to like DMX and shit to like, no, I'm like,
no, I believe you. No, I know.
Promise to God on everything. No, like if I had to do all of this shit to be able to hold my boss accountable, I can't even imagine what a young woman has to go through to not only hold her boss accountable, but hold this man accountable. This man who also is like the gatekeeper of like all of her dreams and success of her hard work.
Well, right. And then you add sex on top of it, which is another deeper layer of control and domination. But I think also like, no, Cassie was not in a position to hold him accountable for whatever reason, but also her as the victim of him and like of his abuse, it's also not her responsibility to hold him accountable necessarily. And like, I think about, you know, you were talking about the system that he created around her, and it's just like, sometimes it does really blow my mind, because you like that system requires many individual people with daughters, families, girlfriends, sisters, whatever, that's like that they don't want to see what was happening to Cassie or any of the other women who have accused Diddy of violence sexually or workplace misconduct or whatever, or men who have accused Diddy of these type of crimes. But you know, and you like thinking like how does this powerful Voldemort-like character get to do these things for so long to so many people in front of so many people? And I'm just like, it's this obsession with money also, because both this obsession with money and people thinking that money could be the way to like of accountability, like, oh well, she got paid, so let's just move on from this. Like, no.
Mm-hmm.
She got paid. Diddy didn't take any responsibility.
Right.
He's not being held accountable by any entity, right? Besides Cassie at that moment when she filed the lawsuit and then they settled like 36 or 24 hours later or something like that.
Like literally 24 hours, low-key less than 24 hours.
Yeah,
later.
but that's
which is
not,
also a sign of like, okay.
We already know what's
like,
up.
Okay, bet.
But that's not, I think that there's just like both this idea that money could be a way just in and of itself. Because money could be a source of like restitution or a way to attempt to start to repair.
Yeah.
But it is not accountability and it is not responsibility. But I think that like,
I would say it's a form of acknowledgement.
Yeah.
I've done you harm.
Yeah.
Let me pay you.
Right.
This ain't gonna heal shit,
No.
solve shit, but it might just be a symbol of acknowledgement. Hey,
yeah.
You know what? You're
and
right.
that's an important step in accountability.
Totally important
But
step.
I think that like the way that power and money, like just this obsession that we have that like the dollar is the access to the desire to reach the dollar or get a dollar more and more and more is the ultimate bottom line of what we should be determining, what should be determining our actions, is how white supremacy uses like is able to thrive, especially in the context of communities of color. Because it's just like Diddy bought the tape that from the hotel, right? Paid all of these people to create this system. And so people who are seeing what was happening to Cassie, seeing what was happening to these other folks, and are like, damn, this is wrong, this is bad, but I shouldn't say anything. One, because this is how I get my bills paid. And two, if I do say something, not only am I not going to get my bills paid, this person with lots of power and money is going to use his money to come after me.
Right.
And it's just like to me, it's such a deep part of the sickness that we cannot talk about accountability or responsibility for harm, for violence, sexual violence, whatever, without also talking about how we are so consumed by not just money in general, but like this idea that is the almighty determining highest of highest needs and desires, that everything else has to fall underneath that. Like this person's safety, this person's dignity, and frankly, your dignity is on the line.
I'm happy you brought up the, money aspect and essentially how people are like using the fact that Cassie got paid as a reason to like, all right, shut up and keep it moving and like, let's stop talking about it. Because it's also connected to this reality that like Diddy is a billionaire, and like, again, going back to various forms of accountability and how we develop relationships with accountability, how the fuck do you hold a billionaire accountable? How do you hold somebody accountable that like, again, literally in the legal legal docs of this case, it literally says that like Diddy was able to like, they would have these like freaknik parties, these like sex parties essentially that were like specifically for Diddy and like all of his like weird ass crazy ass fantasies, but like there would be recordings on Cassie's phone and she would be like, okay, I just deleted this video, like whatever, last night was fucking awful, I don't want to keep it moving, whatever. But like he's a billionaire, so he has the power and resources to somehow retrieve deleted files.
Wow.
Like literally in the legal docs, it's talking about how he was able to retrieve deleted content, essentially deleted videos. That's the degree of like hierarchy we're talking about when it comes to accountability. Somebody that could literally restructure the way you the way you actually thought accountability
You even
looked
think
like.
that like, 1 + 1 is 2. Like, meh.
Mm-hmm.
1 + 1 is actually like 3.5.
Like, you know what? It's cool. Nobody's going to find out about what happened, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, like, Diddy pays for something and, like, he has access to it, or,
Just terrible.
he's able to literally pay people to, like, oh, Cassie's where? Partying with who? I don't like that shit. Go to that club and, like, tell her to go home. And, like, literally, it's your birthday, my nigga, and, like, Diddy has the resources to make a phone call and have motherfuckers in that club push your ass out and say go home.
Which is, by the way, why one of many reasons why billionaires should not exist.
Mm-hmm.
There should nobody should have the power to skirt accountability by saying, all right, well, I'll just drop $32 million
A snap of fingers.
and just be quiet. Like, that is one of many, 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 many reasons why we don't need billionaires. I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's Rihanna. I don't care if it's Beyonce, Jay-Z, Diddy, all of the thousands of white billionaires. Like, none of that is not okay. It should not be like that. Is how we subvert and skirt accountabilities, because somebody has so many resources to just say, like, no, I'm above the law. I'm above responsibility, or somebody's lifestyle or livelihood is so profitable to enough people that everyone around them just sits and allows the awful shit to happen to people. Like, no, there's no way.
And we've seen this before where, like, resources, because someone has a ton of money, because someone has resources, they're able to actually systematize, like, the way you create a local business, they're able to create a business off of their abuse, their harm.
A business of avoiding accountability.
A business of avoiding accountability. And, like,
they call
literally
that sex trafficking.
Sex trafficking. And that's some crazy shit that I was actually experiencing too, which is like, all right, sex trafficking. This is before I read the legal docs. Mm-hmm. My assumption was like, oh, it's probably some, like, technicality on sex trafficking. He's not actually, like,
not really trafficking humans for sex. That's crazy.
Until I read the legal docs and I was like, oh shit.
Yeah.
He's legitimately sex trafficking his employee. And, like, so I always try to, like, find ways to simplify things and, like, get things to be more tangible to people. And I think that's one of the pieces in all of this that I'm really holding on to, is like, your boss did this shit to you.
That's true, because I think there's this narrative that, like, Cassie and Diddy, like, Diddy was Cassie's boyfriend. Mm-hmm. But from my understanding, like, their entire relationship started with sexual violence. It started with him abusing her, coercing her, forcing her to take drugs. It was not like, oh, this is my boo.
Yeah.
And then, oh my gosh, she turns around and beats me. No.
Not to mention it's, I believe he was 40 or 44 when they first met.
Right.
And I'm now remembering and confirming, and I think you also said this as well, that she was 22.
Yeah.
Which is just like, I can only imagine the type of manipulation that goes on when you have a 40-year-old, 44-year-old billionaire and a young 22-year-old girl. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, shit, are you this nigga's boyfriend, or have you been manipulated into this weird ass situation with your boss? Mm-hmm. Like the place that you work. Your employer.
Yeah.
Like, that's just always the craziest part to me, is like, oh, right, she's hired by this nigga. That, like, she's hired by Bad Boy. She's an artist under Bad Boy.
Right.
And he's doing all of this to...
Like, you're in a contract.
Right.
It's not just that you're emotionally,
You are legally
brought into
tied to
this.
this
You are
nigga.
legally tied to this. Yeah, it's wild. I think also, this. I just keep going back to like every single individual that made a choice to not hold this person accountable. Or not, and I also don't mean to say like, oh well, why didn't you all just do something differently? Because obviously the shit is very hard.
Yeah.
And that's why when we are like, oh well, they're in a romantic relationship, and like I saw some tweet that was like, oh, none of y'all boyfriends ever beat on you. Like, first of all,
let's not fucking normalize
that's
that
not
shit.
cool.
Please fucking
at
chill
all.
out.
Period. I don't care when it happened.
Help.
But also like, if we can see that, oh, that's Diddy and Cassie are if we think that they're in some type of romantic relationship, then I can imagine it's easier to look a different way or to be like, oh, well, that's just how they are together. It's different when it's like, this is your coworker
Yeah.
that is being abused by your boss.
Yeah, no.
Both of your bosses. That's one type of conversation. That's one experience that we have. It's like, okay, like that's not cool. But if it's like, oh, this is your boss's girlfriend, who also happens to be your coworker, or this is your coworker's boyfriend who also happens to be your boss, but they're having this type of like you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I think that we have this assumption or this different type of understanding of romantic relationships that doesn't necessarily require us as individuals in a community with these people to hold them accountable in a particular way or to step in a particular way, which is just also kind of backwards. And to your point, makes the manipulation and the way that of Cassie's treatment so much more devious,
The relationship framing is another layer of protecting accountability, because it's like
protecting from accountability.
Like essentially preventing accountability from happening. Yeah. Relationships tend to have a heavy culture of, how do I protect XYZ? How do I protect this person from accountability? Inside, internal, and external. Like inside the relationship and outside the relationship, viewing the relationship. Like, and that's bullshit, because, God forbid anything bad happens to one of your homies, they're coming over here. Or like, we're reaching out like, yo, what the fuck? What happened? Like, da-da-da-da. And like, there's like an absorption of like, okay, well, whether or not I have a relationship with accountability, now this is my problem. Yeah. And if I didn't have a relationship with accountability, I'm certainly going to be developing one now, because this relationship has outpoured some toxic shit out into the community.
Now we're all seeing it.
Yeah. And I know for myself, and for me, it's like, I'll be damned if I'm just like, oh man, well, that's just how such and such do that shit. Nah, bro. Like, hey man, I know I might be sounding wild as fuck right now. This is literally me. I might be sounding wild as fuck right now. But I just want to make sure you don't be doing no wild shit to that woman that you say you love and da-da-da, because there's a couple of ingredients that just showed up right now. And in my experience, those ingredients are typically linked to this style. Right. And I just want to make sure that I'm not consenting to no bullshit, because one, I'm going to hold you accountable. And two, I need to hold myself accountable because I recognize this ingredient.
Well, but that's also why we have to challenge this notion that accountability equals punishment.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because if that's the case, if you believe that accountability equals punishment, then it's going to be really hard for you to hold your homie accountable for the type of behavior that it looks like is flawed, and he might be treating his girl or his woman like flawed, right? And so I just keep thinking about, like, accountability is a gift. And actually, when we did Black Woman 4 in 2019, trying to practice a value of accountability, not perfection. And this isn't a different type of relationship, because
absolutely,
it's
but still a great example.
Yeah, because it's the relationship between a group of us who were like black women, progressive black women, who were attempting to make an endorsement of a candidate, and we ended up endorsing Elizabeth Warren. But before we did that, one of the things that we asked her to agree to was to be in a value of practicing accountability, not perfection, with us, particularly us as black women that were aligning ourselves with her as a candidate. At the time, 2019, 2020. And so we introduced this concept of accountability, not perfection, because we know that nobody is perfect. Everybody makes mistakes, and harm is a thing that occurs in interpersonal relationships, in community relationships, in, institutional government type of relationships. Like, harm does happen. That's a part of the human experience. That's why, but we can also say, or mistakes happen, harm, hurt, mistakes, whatever. But we have to be able to say, you made a mistake, or this thing that you did was harmful. These are ways to, one, take accountability, take responsibility, acknowledge, and then also move forward in a different way. And it could look different each time. We literally had a situation where Elizabeth, we endorsed her, and then she said something that was flaw about the death penalty. And we had to hit her up like, yo, WTF, you need to make these changes. And she did. That was then, but I think there's a way to say, we don't have to have this, tenet, which is a part of white supremacy culture, which is either or thinking. It has to be all light or all dark, right? Like, it can be multiple things can be true. And we can work on a spectrum, on a timeline, on a place of accountability. And I think that if we introduce that more in situations, then we don't get to a situation where we have this mega supervillain in Diddy who's terrorizing the, hundreds of people, including this woman who he says he loves. Do you know what I mean? I think that there's got to be more in there. That accountability, not perfection, allows you to have a conversation with your homie that's like, yo, I'm not saying you ain't shit. I'm not saying that you're a terrible person. I'm not saying I'm calling the police on you. But what I am saying is, I'm going to stop you right here, put a flag in the ground, and say, what we're not going to do is that, and I'm going to be the one to hold you account to that truth, to that line.
I do appreciate this example, though, of accountability, not perfection, with Elizabeth Warren. So if you're not familiar already, here at the South, we typically try to shift culture. We typically try to look at what is the typical reaction, what's the typical thing that happens here, and then ask ourselves, all right, where do we want to take it? And then aggressively move the needle in that direction. So with this example of Black Women 4, I really fuck with it because it's this moment where it's like you all are attempting to create a healthy relationship with a political candidate, something that is typically a very flimsy, that's already a whole situation within itself. But instead of just endorsing her, y'all are like, yo, we want to have this accountability, not perfection type of relationship with you. And to be endorsed by us means this, and this is the style. And I fuck with that because, again, it's a good example of shifting the culture, shifting the norm of endorsements into a more hopeful, experience, an attempt for a more hopeful experience. And I think that's what, is really what we're talking about here is with the totality of accountability, how it showed up in this Diddy experience and all the other things we mentioned is there's this weird relationship that we have with accountability as a culture, as a community. I would say that you see this weird relationship with accountability across many different cultures and communities.
Yeah. I think that there is also, part of the reason, and we see this, whether it was like Jonathan Majors, and when he was being held on, when he was on trial for violence against his ex-partner, or Diddy, or the list goes on. Bill Cosby is the best, most infamous example of this to me, where they're trying to bring down the black man, they're trying to destroy the black man. And first of all, who is the they that we're talking about? Mm-hmm. But also, I think that it is understandable, or I don't know if it's understandable, but I can see that it comes from a place of like a white supremacist system treating black people, especially black men, unfairly.
Totally.
Not giving us justice
right.
in the legal system.
Right.
Like using it against us. And so it's like, oh, there it is again. And it's like, which is why we also need to really push to think about, what does accountability and responsibility and repair look like outside of this fuck ass legal criminal injustice system that's actually only designed to keep the powers that be in place. It's not designed to take care of victims. It's not designed to create accountability so that we potentially prevent future harm. That's not what the system is here for. That's not what it does. That's not what it has ever done.
No.
So we really need to, like, I can see where folks might be coming from, of the like, they're trying to tear down the system is going after another black man, and it's like, well, first, no.
Right.
And like we're just trying to get this person to be accountable, and also prevent future harm, potentially give this victim or these victims some type of opportunity to be made closer to whole. And unfortunately, all we have right now is these lawsuits, is these criminal charges to give the perception of responsibility and accountability, but that is not what it is. And we gotta work together as a community, interpersonally, and then on a societal level, to make that shift beyond that not so justice system.
Yeah, and I think, speaking specifically about this is a moment in which, tearing down the black man, multiple things can be true. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that we develop our understanding of racism, understanding of white supremacy, understanding of abuse, violence, interpartner relationship harm, abuse, violence, sexual violence, assault, because there's a difference between holding this person accountable because of their years and systematic abuse, violence, harm, sex trafficking, all types of other shit, and that's not actually associated with tearing down a black man.
Correct.
It just so happens that this motherfucker that needs to be held accountable is black.
And is a prominent black man.
But that is actually not that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is that this person is wicked. Mm-hmm. This person is literally a fucking Gotham City villain. Like a straight up villain out of a Disney movie. Pick your favorite movie, like whatever. Literally a villain. And we have to be able to separate when actually is the system trying to bring down a black man versus this weak ass system trying to show a drop of accountability.
Yeah.
This weak ass system trying to be like, okay, Cassie, we hear your claims. Let's go through this legal system, and
this is the best we can do. Hopefully
something comes out of this so that on paper it reads, oh yeah, this person did harm you, and this is what accountability looks like. Not actually solve years of harm, the depth of harm. Totally not trying to totally not trying to make this about myself, but I'm like, Motherfucker, I have basic ass harm and experiences and trauma that happened in workplaces that I'm like, what that motherfucker did in that meeting is still pissing me off. And that shit happened 8 years ago. And like, if I could experience that off of some little petty shit that somebody did in a meeting that has its ties to white supremacy, imagine with somebody who fucking went through years of like violence, sexual assault, abuse, all of these things. Manipulation.
Yeah.
Like, I can't even imagine what Cassie is going through and is experiencing, because no amount of money in the world can actually solve for the trauma, the harm, and all that shit that she went through. That is also like being publicly consumed.
Of course, yes. Oof, terrible.
Like, think about the crazy shit that happened in y'all's houses in privacy that you're just keeping in the corner back there as you show up in, you know, everyday society to the community, like da 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 da. Hey y'all, da da da. This shit happened. It's embedded as a like moment in history in the culture.
We watched it in real time.
We watched that shit in real time.
And then we're like, oh, I don't know. Who knows? Diddy's bad. Hope she's okay. Like, yeah, I do want to say that to throw a splash of hope into the conversation.
Throw it.
I am hopeful that, you know, we're in this moment where we just spent at least a week, maybe two, where folks were talking about the Kendrick and Drake beef, and a big part of that was allegations of sexual violence or sexual assault and pedophilia, or like mistreatment, like dating of young women, or misusing of young women. And now we're in this conversation with Diddy and all of these allegations, and like I think there is something. I am hopeful that this is the beginning of another turning point. Right, in particularly in entertainment, but particularly in the music industry and in hip hop, where at the very least there is a louder chorus of people that are like, "Hey, that's some fan shit. If you know, you know."
Yeah,
you know what I mean. That's not no, or like. I have some more people will speak up before we get to an institution of abuse, a
Decades
system, a machine of abuse.
Right.
Because, you know, right, we had the Me Too moment, you know, in years leading up to, and then during 2016 and 2017. And that was a lot that was really led by mostly women, but also just generally women, men, non-binary people that are victims of sexual violence or sexual assault or sexual harassment in the entertainment industry. That was led by the victims, or the survivors, as I should say, not victims, survivors. But I think that in this moment, specifically with hip hop, it's time there's an opportunity, especially for men who consume hip hop, whether or not you are someone who's committed harm in the past, but to be able to like say, actually, we're done here. This behavior is enough, and there's enough of a conversation about it in the culture right now that I am hopeful that it is the beginning of a turning point towards more men, more consumers of hip hop, of this culture, in infusing mutual accountability into their consumption of the culture.
Yes. Definitely hopeful as well. Definitely co-sign that as well. Lean into accountability. It's definitely, I know for myself, it's definitely something that I have found as a secret sauce, whether it's in my relationship, friendships, my relationships at work. It's definitely a, secret sauce to lean into, whether it's holding someone accountable or being open to being held accountable. you know, I know coming from where I come from, I'm just really, I don't know, just genuinely appreciative of my journey and appreciative of my relationship with accountability and my growing relationship with accountability. And I just encourage everyone to be intentional about, you know, what is your relationship with accountability, and how do you want to like be intentional about like writing that reality into your design, your needs, your wants moving forward in life.
And how can you receive it as a gift, as love, and also offer it as a gift, offer it as love, right?
Yeah.
Don't be afraid. I don't want to hold this person accountable because they're gonna think that I'm shaming them or think that I hate them. Like, if I'm holding you account, if I'm trying to hold you accountable, it's because I see that you have values that you want to live by, and that your behavior, your actions, or whatever, how you showed up in that moment or in that situation, or how you're showing up is not in line with those values. But I know that you can and will want to live up to those higher values.
Yes.
And so I see you. I love you. I want to give you an opportunity and give you space and give you encouragement to lean into those higher values instead of just letting you wallow in your yuck behavior.
Yes. And you know, as we close, definitely just want to emphasize this values perspective. I feel like you know, how you value yourself often is a reflection, is associated with how you hold someone else accountable. Sometimes I feel like our relationship with accountability, our relationships with valuing ourselves, often, you know, doesn't allow us to actually access various forms of accountability, whether it's holding somebody accountable or being held accountable. Because if you value yourself, you're definitely going to be excited and thrilled and open about holding people accountable, because it's literally like, hey, here's how I'm designed, and like, maybe you should read this. And then the other form is like, oh, I'm being held accountable. Let me get over the like, you know, how my reaction is showing up and make space to be held accountable, because I know that this accountability is actually going to make me better in the long run. So like, definitely want to big up and emphasize the value piece, because I think that's the first time I heard us mentioning it in today's episode. But it's definitely something that I know I wanted to emphasize, but didn't get the chance to, because
it's just so much to say.
Definitely
I feel like
so
we could
much to
talk
say.
about this for another couple hours. I will say we should definitely also encourage people to check out organizations that, and even just this concept of transformative justice, and organizations or writers, scholars that are trying to move that. There's been a ton of research, a ton of organizing to try to shift towards away from punishment, more towards transformation and restoration in accountability. And maybe we'll have some resources for folks on this episode to like check out as well.
Word. Well, we've made it to the end of this episode. Definitely just want to appreciate y'all on the journey thus far. Appreciate the love, appreciate the comments, the shares, you know,
All the feedback.
Being out in these streets and getting people's feedbacks, getting people's reactions to us, you know, sharing, releasing, and creating this podcast. Really encourage you all to keep on doing it. It's very exciting for Angela and I. Also just helps motivate us to keep cooking this up. And yeah, the shit has been fun. If you like this hat, you can find it at this website right here.
Ding. Appreciate y'all.
Peace, y'all.